So kind of working through this idea of seeing the system. And I chose for this one to talk about some work that I did before I came to Carnegie on instructional coaching. And I think about instructional coaching. This is a case where we're intentionally designing a set of professional development experiences for teachers. The intent of this is to support teachers to change their instructional practice, and this in turn is intended to support improvements in student learning. So there's a pretty complex and long causal chain at work when you think about introducing coaches into schools. And drawing on an example here from Los Angeles Unified School District, which when they embraced instructional coaches went in a 3-week period of time from 0 to 600 instructional coaches. And we expect these coaches will work on a variety of things with teachers, their pedagogical knowledge and skill, make sure they're covering the right content, whole set of things that are supposed to change as a result of the coaches being there. And that, of course, ultimately is going to result to improvements in student learning. That's the, intervention. That's teachers change, students change. And then, as Lewis had in his presentation, sitting in the middle is this proverbial black box. The coaches are going into schools, and these things are supposed to happen, but what's the actual work system? What actually is happening in here, or would have to happen in here for this and that to possibly occur? So you got to kind of go inside this and say, well, what's the work system? And it's got a bunch of pieces to it. So let's take a little closer look at it. There are some new processes. First of all, there's a new role that's being put in place. There's some new work processes that are being invented, and there are a whole set of new relationships that have to be forged. And you get a material weakness in any one of these pieces, and chances are this thing doesn't work. So whole set of questions you have to start asking. How should the coaches spend their time? What's the guidance you're giving them as to what it is they're actually supposed to do? And depending upon that, how you answer that question is probably going to change everything else that's going on here. Then there's the core of the work. What do key coaches need to know and be able to do? And how do we know if they can? So it gets to the question of the quality of coaching and what we're doing to support the development of these people who are taking in this new work. Because remember, when this started, nobody was trained as a coach. For the coach to be effective, he or she has to develop a positive relationship with their principal because they're really dependent. Coach is dependent on their principal in order to be able to enact their role in the school. And this person is going into a context in which there's some history of a set of relationships among teachers and with leadership in the school, and depending upon the quality of those relationships, this thing is also going to look somewhat different, or the task of the coach coming in is going to be quite different depending upon these base conditions over there. And then the coach is essentially acting as a lone professional practitioner, and they're a scarce resource. So ultimately it comes down to a question of who's being coached about what, and how do we know if this is actually advancing teacher development. So my point of all this is that as soon as you start to look inside and you ask, well, what's the work system, and where in the work system might variability in performance start to arise? Well, there's a bunch of places. And then you got the main strand, the quality of coaching. Actually, it starts with selection, the ongoing professional development support, and the quality of coaching. And this in some sense becomes the hard part, because the question is, can we agree on what quality looks like in coaching? See, if we can't answer that question, then if we can't agree on what quality looks like, then by definition, we're going to have variability in the quality of what's actually experienced. So in this case here, it essentially comes down to being able to answer a handful of questions. If coaching is going on, and we're watching it going on. What do we see? How do we interpret what we see? What are we going to say? And probably how are we going to say it? What the latter might be called the coaching stance. And we have to have some understanding, some common language, talk about what Lewis was talking about before, about how we would look at those four things to be able to answer the question, do we think quality coaching is actually occurring? All right, so you put this all together and this begins to look like the kind of information you need to support improvement in coaching. It's about the work system, got it connected to the, there's that whole other box we had before about what the changes were in teachers' practice. And then there's another one that sits out over here, which is the actual changes in student learning. So if you want to make a system of coaching reliably improve instruction, this then begins to look like what you need, what kind of information people who are doing this work need to be looking at to figure out how to get better at doing the work. It's certainly not enough to have just a value-added indicator of how good the teacher is and some standardized test score of student achievement, which is what we do. We tend to get a lot of data over here, a lot of data at the end, but we tend to be ignorant about the system that's producing the data at the end. And you can't get the quality outcomes reliably at scale. You can't advance that social justice mission that Lewis was talking about before if you can't see the system that's producing the outcomes and begin to gather some evidence that could actually help the people engaged in the work get better at doing the work. That's the core idea. So kind of coming back, thinking about this as a research problem, to ask the question, does coaching work? Let's do a randomized control trial on coaching, which the IES actually did do and found a null effect. It's a silly question. Across vast domains of human activity, whether you think about the arts or sports or whatever you look at, we understand that the way expertise gets developed is through practice and through engaging in others who are somewhat more expert than you in the analysis of your practice. So we know that coaching can work. So to ask it, a question is just silly. But it is a human and social resource intensive system, coaching, even when it's well planned. And we expect to see variability in actual performance. And so the critical intellectual pursuit is, well, what would it take to achieve quality reliably in a system like this? That's the question we really have to answer, not that one.